Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this afternoon's webinar. I do hope you're going to find it interesting. We found recently that the topic of whether employers can force their staff to have the COVID vaccine has been something that's been very widely debated over the past few weeks, and I can't think of anything more topical than this particular question. So we're going to have a bit of a boxing match, a bit of a debate. And I'm going to introduce you to Beverley, Sunderland and Bhayani. Now, I'm not going to read the bios. You can see the bios in front of you, but I will tell you a little bit about my involvement with them. I know both of them really very well. Bev is an outstanding solicitor, and if I was involved in an employment tribunal, I would want Bev in my corner. I'm sure she would deliver a knockout blow, if you'll forgive me. But what about Jay? Well, Jay is also excellent. She provides an outstanding HR and employment retainer service, amongst other things. Her clients absolutely love her, as evidenced to close to 100 5-star Google reviews. No one can knock out Jay, but what will happen today? It's like Tyson Fury against Anthony Joshua. So we are going to begin in just a few moments. Just to remind you, this is webinar mode, which means we can't see you, we can't hear you. If you would like to make any comments, please use the chat facility. But the Q&A is probably the more important button. If you want to ask a question to our two experts, please do ask a question. And after we have finished the presentation, we will do our best to address as many of those questions as we can within the allocated time. Right, so this is what we're going to be covering. The argument in favour of forcing staff to have the vaccine, the argument against, and then to make it practical, we're going to consider whether or not employers can force their staff to have the vaccine in care homes, in shops, and in law firms. And given the recent news about Matt Hancock, we thought it would be quite interesting to also ask a question about workplace affairs. And what we may do is we may put some polls together. We'll see if we can get the Zoom poll facility to work so that you can have a voice as well and interact and get involved and share your views. So without further ado, I think we're ready to start now. Now, Bev and Jay, if I can have your attention, please. If you can both look at the camera, thank you very much. I want to caution you to keep this fight clean at all times, protect yourself at all times, do what I say, you must obey, good luck and God bless. First of all, Bev.
Thank you, David. Thank you for that great introduction. I just want to make it quite clear at the outset that I am not advocating holding down your employees and putting a vaccine into their arm, because I think we'd probably find that that contravenes quite a lot of the laws, and you'd probably find yourself in prison. Now, I also want to make it clear that David, as well as looking extremely dapper in his bow tie, is also going to be appearing as a cameo as Chris Whitty. And it is to David that I will be saying, next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, also, trade descriptions, I'd just like to make it entirely clear, not least because I know that a number of my team are logged into this, that I do not look like this. Obviously, my face does, but the rest of it, I'm afraid, is entirely fictional. Also, in the interests of complete transparency, I have spent the last 6 months administering, not literally, but helping administer 66,000 COVID vaccinations, and therefore I am a great supporter of the programme. But that is not what I am here to talk about. I have my employment hat on as a solicitor who qualified in 1988. I know they can do marvellous things these days, can't they? And to take that legal expertise and try and address one of the questions that is pretty prevalent on the minds of most employers. Now, for any of you who actually tuned in to DG Legal's relatively recent webinar, you'll be saying, well, hang on a minute, Bev, last time you were talking about this, what you were saying was that actually we couldn't force employees to have vaccinations in order to work with us. So how is it that you've completely changed your mind? To which the answer is, and to sound like Boris Johnson, who in fact was born the same day, same year as me, I know, sorry, you can't have everything, is I'm following the science. Now, one of the things that a lot of employees will say is, well, there's lots of medical reasons why I wouldn't have this vaccine. I might get a blood clot. Well, there is more risk of you actually getting a blood clot on a long haul flight, do you remember those, than there is from the vaccine. And also what the science shows is that actually COVID can also increase the chances of getting a blood clot. And they're not quite sure whether having the vaccine is just symptomatic of that, but the risk is absolutely tiny. You would have to be really, really unlucky. I've also heard tale of vaccine injuries, and I have to say, as I've said, I've seen 66,000 jabs being administered. I haven't seen anything. I have heard a tale from my sister that some people are having difficulties where at the jab site that they have problems lifting their arms. But you know, that compared to long COVID, well. So next slide, please, David. Let's just look at some of the competing rights and obligations, because I think it's really important to set the scene here. So the first one is that for an employer, you have an obligation to provide a safe place of work for employees and those around them. So that would include customers, clients, contractors. So as an employer, you are going to say, well, hang on a minute, I have seen the science, and we'll look at that in a minute, and this is why I have changed my approach. And I now know that not only does the vaccine stop or reduce the chances of an employee getting and falling seriously ill with the disease, but it also significantly reduces the transmission rate. And when I say significantly, we're talking 50% or more. And that is from a public Health England research. So because of that, I think that the pendulum has swung very much in the direction of employers to say, I have a duty of care to all of these people here. Now, you might say to me, well, hang on a minute, Bev, if people want to be protected, why don't they just jolly well get out and have a vaccine of their own? That's a good question. But what about situations where people can't have a vaccine because they've got a medical condition that means they can't have it? They perhaps are living with people who are shielding because they really are high risk. If they do get it, they might still fall very ill, particularly if they're elderly or if they're vulnerable. So it's too easy to say, just go out and get a vaccine in order to protect yourself. There's also going to be the problem that there is going to be pressure from third parties. Now, all the businesses at the moment are trying to recover from, frankly, the last 16 months. And they are going to be pressurized by their clients, their customers, to say, hang on a minute, we want to make sure that if we are visiting you, that all of your employees have protection. Because we know, because we have read the same report that Bev has from Public Health England that says that transmission is reduced by up to 50%. And because of that, what we're going to say to you, Mr. Businessman, is that unless you can tell me that the people who are driving your cars, piloting your planes, or serving me at the counter have been vaccinated, I'm going to put my business elsewhere. And for those of you who are familiar with employment law, you will know that actually pressure from a third party is actually a reason for fairly dismissing an employee under what we call some other substantial reason. Now, it doesn't mean that you just say, yes, of course, let's just fire somebody. You have to be seen to be taking reasonable steps to try and negotiate with the customer, the client, to try and find alternative ways. And we will look at this because I am not saying for one moment that this is a one size fits all. So please don't take that away from this talk, but I'm going to arm you with the arguments. So the counter argument to that, which I put at the bottom of this slide, is that employees will argue that they have rights not to be discriminated against under the Equality Act, and they also have rights under the European Convention of Human Rights. And just a reminder, just because we left the EU, we are still bound by those rules. And that is a right to life, which includes being forced to have something pushed into your body. And also it includes philosophical beliefs. So next slide, please, David. Does the vaccine reduce transmission? Well, I have put the link up there to the Public Health England study, which shows that it reduces by up to half. And that is quite significant. You also, it's important to remember that the efficacy, i.e. how well they work, of the vaccines that we are getting are so amazing when compared with things like the flu vaccine, that it really is something that everybody needs to consider. And if you decide not to have it, then in the circumstances I'm going to talk to you about, employers might well be perfectly reasonable to say, I'm sorry, but you can't work here. So if you are, there are going to be two scenarios. There are going to be those employees who are already employed, and there are going to be those employees who are applying for roles. And we are told that the Equality and Human Rights Commissioner has already been consulted about the decisions, certainly in relation to care homes and hospitals, and actually sees no problem at all in relation to human rights. Because after all, those who are sick, those who have underlying health concerns, also have a right to life. And they need to know that everything is being taken, every single step is being taken to try and protect them. And for heaven's sake, I mean, we're already getting Facebook statuses, dating statuses on various dating apps, I'm advised for the avoidance of doubt, that asks you to set out your vaccination status. It's important to people. And if it's important at that level, it's going to be important in business as well. Next slide, please. David, wake up. Next slide, please.
So we're just having, there we go.
There we go.
No, there we go.
Okay, so you can't see this very well on the side of the slide here, but you will be sent the slides. But the important one is on the left-hand side, and this shows transmission. Now, the red line that goes all the way up is those who have not had a vaccination, and the blue line that sort of just goes straight across is those who have had a vaccination. And the other two, the one in the middle shows, I have to put my glasses on here, it shows mortality, and the one on the right-hand side shows prevalence. And in both cases, you can see the blue line, which is right down at the bottom. So this is a report, again, from Public Health England, the 28th of June, 2021. I'm also just going to remind everybody that in the UK, England and Wales, around 10,000 people a week die. Because of the efficacy of this vaccination, in the week to the 25th of June, 99 people died of coronavirus, and that's 1.1% of those who died in that week. And that is frankly amazing, particularly when you consider that 1,009 people died of flu and pneumonia. Keep an eye on those statistics. It's the Office for National Statistics. It comes out every Tuesday. And again, that will arm you as an employer with reasons why the vaccine is working and why we have to make people have it. Next slide, please, David. So the Equality Act. So there are going to be four areas to argue. There's going to be younger people, although now that everybody can have the vaccine, it's not really going to be applicable. Pregnant women, although the advice has now changed to say that actually the balance of risk has changed, really should be having the vaccine rather than waiting. Those with underlying health conditions who might come under the disability areas of the law, and also those with a philosophical belief about vaccination. Now, philosophical belief needs slightly more exploration. Next slide, please. And I've set out here what the tests are. Now, what I would say is this is worthy of respect in a democratic society. So, for instance, those who still do genuinely believe that Bill Gates, despite his divorce and everything else, might be why he's being divorced, is desperately trying to inject us all with little microchips, is probably not going to be worthy of of respect in a demographic society. Although that said, there was a case literally last week, Ms. Forstater, who the Employment Appeals Tribunal has said, actually it's a very modest threshold these days to get over. All I would say is that anybody who genuinely does think that Bill Gates is trying to inject microchips into us clearly has not seen a doctor or nurse grappling with trying to dilute and extract 7 doses of coronavirus vaccine out of one little file, because frankly it would be real hit and miss to try and get all the microchips into the right ones. But somebody might well say, I have a philosophical belief. In respect of all of those areas, please do not forget that there is a defence, and that defence is objective justification. But that defence will also apply to arguments under the Convention, European Convention on Human Rights. Next slide, please. And again, I've set out the 2 areas that they can try and argue. Now, bear in mind, we are not going to get any decisions in relation to European Convention questions until it'll be, well, 2 years before it comes to tribunal and be referred. So we're probably looking 3 or 4 years. But this is my view. Next slide, please, David. You have a defence of objective justification. And this is where I say that this is not going to be one size fits all. Essentially, objective justification means balancing up the rights of the employer with the rights of the employee. Can the employer do things differently? Can they suggest that somebody stays at home and works from home and doesn't interact with anybody else? Is that realistic? Yes, we've all been working from home for 16 months and we've all been getting by, but actually, is that employee going to perform to their best, or do they really need to be in the office? They may be able to find them roles where they don't interact with anybody in the workplace, and therefore they significantly reduce the risk. I have to say, I don't think that objective justification is going to work in any shape or form if you are in a care home or if you are in a hospital setting. I mean, at the moment, you can't be a surgeon unless you have had certain vaccinations, because there is too much of a risk of it being transmitted. And why should COVID be any different to that? So it is going to be important to look at the settings. We're going to look at these as part of the case studies going forward. But I think that a great many working environments are going to be able to objectively justify why they are going to insist on employees having a vaccination or new people joining and having a vaccination. If you haven't done that balancing act, then it might well be that you will lose any claim for discrimination. You might lose a claim for unfair dismissal, because don't forget those over 2 years are entitled not to be unfairly dismissed. But if you're getting pressure from a third party saying, I'm not going to do business with you unless all your employees are vaccinated, what are you going to do? If you've got employees that have to travel abroad in order to do business, because there are certain cultures, for instance, the Chinese, who most of the business is done at the dinner afterwards, then you're going to have people traveling. Nobody's going to be able to travel without vaccinations. So all of that needs to be taken into the mix. But I genuinely believe that if you have got all your ducks in a row, you've done all of that, then you can absolutely insist that your employees have been vaccinated. So remember, a right to life includes the rights of those who are vulnerable in our society, and they need to be protected. For all of those reasons, I think that I should win.
Very good indeed. Okay, I will summarise a couple of points a little bit later, but Jay, it's your turn. So are you going to deliver a knockout blow? Oh my goodness. talk about unexpected IT issues. At the very moment she was about to start, I think her internet has failed. So what we're going to do is just take a breath and maybe take a time out for a few seconds, and we'll hope to get her back. So just bear with us just for a moment, and we'll see if we can get her back.
In the alternative, David, I'm more than happy to argue against myself if that helps. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I mean, that's what we're paid to do. I mean, the very first question, one of my team will come in and ask me a question, and I'll say, who are we for, the employer or the employee? Because, you know, we have this ability to argue it from both sides. And Jay did say that she was having building works done. So I wonder if somebody has just put a shovel through the internet connection.
Well, while we're waiting, and I'm sure Ali is contacting Jay as we speak, just to get an update. In real life, Bev, have you had any employers or employees seek your advice about either this topic or something similar?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We had a raft of inquiries just as the UK started to open up, and with a lot of businesses wanting to just implement a blanket, you must have a vaccination, otherwise we're not going to employ you. And at the time, I counselled them to say, well, hang on a minute, let's look at the kind of business you are. You're going to have to justify why. Can you do it a different way? We don't yet have the science that supports the fact that actually you are going to reduce the transmission rates by doing it, by having people who are vaccinated. And the science has moved on since then. And in fairness to all of our corporate clients who sought our advice, they did exactly that. They sat down with a piece of paper and they looked at the pros, they looked at the cons, and they came up with a policy that was industry specific to them rather than just a one size fits all.
Now, Bev, I was going to tell you this, but we didn't have time. I thought I'd just let you know that there's a sort of pal of mine who's a gardener, and he does our garden. And I was telling him about this session last Wednesday, and he asked if he could join the session, and I thought about it, and I decided not to. He's got very strong views. He believes that it is a hoax, that there is no such thing as COVID-19. And when I challenged him on his beliefs, he explained to me that he knew 3 people that had went to hospital with side effects after the vaccination, yet he knows nobody that's had COVID-19, let alone knowing anybody that has died. So it's just quite interesting. He was very, very passionate about his beliefs. And, you know, and I just couldn't persuade him. You know, I tried talking about the evidence, the data, as you've set out very well over the last few minutes. And I worry that it isn't just 1 or 2 people out there. I think there are many thousands of people that aren't going to be vaccinated because they believe the whole thing is a conspiracy.
Oh, yeah, and I completely agree. I have friends in America who, you know, he is a self-made millionaire. They're highly intelligent people, and they hold absolutely that view. They won't even wear masks in public. So yeah, I completely get that. But for the avoidance of doubt, I think you're wrong. You know, I don't think it's a hoax. I think it's very real. You just look at the BBC website today, they reckon just short of 1 million people in the UK have got long COVID. You know, try telling them it's a hoax. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, as I uttered the words knockout blow, Jay literally disappeared. I mean, I've never had such great timing as that before, Jay. What was it, an IT issue you experienced?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Our Wi-Fi just completely cut out, so we've found an alternative way of getting back in.
Fantastic. Well, you're up.
I haven't been blown out yet. I'm back on.
You've pulled yourself off the canvas and you're ready to rock and roll. So, Jay, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, David, and thanks, Bev. Yeah, I don't think it's a conspiracy. And just for the record, I have had both my vaccinations. But I must admit, the last 16 months have felt a little bit like being in a boxing ring for me. our motto at Bhayani Law, our strapline is "in your corner," interestingly enough. And I do feel that we've been fighting people's corner on both sides. We've had employees desperately unhappy about being forced to have the vaccine or being treated detrimentally if they didn't. And we've had employers asking us what they do about trying to mandate it. So I'm presenting the argument against, as you know, and in my view, no, employers can't force their employees to have the vaccine, and they absolutely shouldn't try to do so. There's no law that says people have to have the vaccine, even if the employer would prefer them to. And although the government's proposed a change in the law with care homes, that's not law yet, and we'll see what happens with that. But I don't think there's any plan to have a similar mandate in other sectors, as far as I'm aware. But I feel it's been really useful seeing Bev's slides and the detail of some of the legislation that we work within. And of course, as an employment lawyer, I'm interested in that. But I also feel very strongly that we need to be lawyers. And, it's our duty to understand and to implement and interpret the law. And to be honest, I'm fed up of people being treated and behaving like sheep. I've found it really hard these last few months. I feel that people have been made to feel that they'll be jailed if they hug the granny, if they go to their office and do their most productive work, even with very little risk to themselves or anybody else, or if they go for a bike ride at no risk to anyone that's too far from home. And now, if they don't get a vaccine. In my view, the government's created a state of fear. And as lawyers, we need to speak out if we disagree with that. We need to stand up for those people that are simply trying to assert their freedoms. And above all, I think we need to have a common sense approach to risk in our workplace, and also when advising our clients, for those of us that are employment lawyers. But I think, first of all, thinking about why people refuse to have the vaccine, I think you've got to know your workforce before you can, deal with the issues. So for most people, I think from what I've read, it's either that they feel that the vaccine has been rushed and isn't actually safe, or that it's not necessary to protect themselves or others. Just anecdotally, I know of two people last week who have got COVID and are quite ill with it. One is 60 and she was double vaccinated, and one is 17 and she was double vaccinated because she was working in a vaccination centre. So even though she's young, she had both vaccines. Both have managed to get COVID and are and have been ill. And I'm not sure that the efficacy of the vaccines is known yet. And so I would question very much whether it's something that's proportionate in terms of mandating it. But that's just my sort of views and my little rant, my personal views. But let's have a look at some of the legal stuff and hopefully some practical things to look at within your workplace. So the main problem with mandating the vaccine is, of course, that you face risks associated with dismissing employees. Some of the fair reasons for dismissal and unfair, Bev has brought out in her presentation. But if somebody refuses to have the vaccine and has been employed for over 2 years, of course, they have full employment rights. And so they could potentially bring a claim for unfair dismissal. And some of the things I think you need to consider are whether you've got a fair reason to dismiss employees who refuse the vaccine and have been employed for more than 2 years. I think the other thing, just touching on the health and safety aspects, if you can show that having the vaccine is the most reasonably practicable way of mitigating the risk of COVID-19, having carried out a risk assessment, which is the key starting point, to protect both the employee and their colleagues and those around them. The employees who refuse the vaccine could potentially then be dismissed for a health and safety breach. I think it's most likely to apply, though, in sectors where you have RIDDOR reporting requirements. So that's not in all industries. but the reporting of injuries, diseases and dangerous occurrences regulations, RIDDOR, I think there it's perhaps more likely that you'll be able to use that argument if an employee use a claim. Also, I think Bev mentioned that vaccines might be required for entry to some overseas locations. So if you're working in an industry where an employee's role involves travelling, then the vaccine is likely to be necessary, a necessary job requirement. So the employer is likely to have a fair reason to dismiss an employee who refuses the vaccine. You could make exceptions for medical or belief reasons. Again, we've had a look at some of those, and not doing so could lead to discrimination claims from employees with protected characteristics. So I think it's really important to look at that. And also whether there are any other discrimination risks. So, for example, mandating the vaccine before all adults have been offered the opportunity to be vaccinated. Now, hopefully that's not going to be very long. In fact, I think anyone over 18 can go and have the vaccine now. So perhaps that's not a very strong argument anymore, but it's potentially there. And also insisting on the vaccine could potentially discriminate against some Black and minority ethnic groups if statistics show that they're more likely to refuse the vaccine. I don't know where the statistics are at the moment on that, but I think there is certainly some anecdotal evidence that suggests that certain groups are not having the vaccine as readily. And then what about contractors and clients visiting your premises? I think this is quite an interesting one, because where contractors and clients are in the same space as your employees, I think it would be very difficult to show any substantial reason for any difference in treatment. So, you know, what's next? Are we going to insist that our clients have a vaccine before they come into the office? I'm not. And I think it would be, I think, you know, I can't see many law firms actually doing that. So then, you know, looking at the alternative to vaccination is the key thing, I think, for my argument. There are lots of alternatives, and I think that's what we should be looking at. So first of all, strongly encouraging people to have the vaccine if it's important to you as the business owner, or to the business or organisation as a whole. If it's important that people have the vaccine, then, you know, mandating isn't the answer, but encouraging employees is the answer. And I think the starting point is to have a vaccination policy. So in the vaccination policy, which we've been helping some of our clients with at the moment, you can set out the reasons why it's being encouraged within the workplace. You can put in incentives if you want. There are some caveats there, but I have read that, you know, some people are putting in incentives, vouchers, cash, time off to attend appointments, which isn't a right at the moment, and having a clear line of dispute resolution or complaint management if employees feeling concerned about having it, or indeed they're concerned about their colleagues refusing to have it. Offering home working, fortunately in our sector, you know, that's proven to be something that has been possible despite lots of problems never embracing it in the past. You know, we've seen that it work for most jobs. So offering home working to those who haven't been vaccinated is a possibility. Carrying out and sharing your risk assessment with your staff so that they understand what measures you've put in place, I think is really important. And maybe allowing continued use of masks to those who want to, and other PPE, keeping hygiene practices in place, because my understanding is that after the 19th of July, none of that is going to be, it's going to be encouraged, but none of that is going to be mandated either. So you can choose to do that within your workplace. And then, of course, you can have lateral flow testing as an alternative to vaccination. Although my concern with that is that from what I've heard from my teenage kids, lots of kids seem to be, you know, putting the lateral flow test in an ice lolly, and I'm just not sure that the results are reliable. So what about objections on the grounds of religion or belief, which Bev also talked about a little bit? I think there's some interesting angles there. So the Equality Act clearly protects employees against discrimination on the grounds of religion or belief. And I think there's been some reported concerns about pork gelatin in some vaccines. I can only see that that's one of the arguments that could succeed. I don't know what's in them. And I think the different vaccines have different components within them. And then what about vegans? So vegans might disagree with vaccinations on the basis that they've been tested on animals. Ethical veganism, as any employment lawyers watching this will know, not so long ago was found to be, to amount to a belief capable of being under the Equalities Act. It's fairly narrow, it's not every vegan, it's ethical veganism, and you ought to have a look at the definition if you're interested in that. So what if employees don't want to be vaccinated because of the reported risk of blood clots? And Bev helpfully showed us the statistics. And, you know, some people believe that they are at an increased risk of blood clots, infertility, miscarriage, and other potential side effects. Now, I'm not a doctor, and to be honest, I don't know what to believe about the risks. I don't know what to believe about the efficacy or the necessity of having the vaccine when so many people have already had their double vaccine, and there are lots of other variants now. And I'm not sure whether the vaccines that we've had are actually going to work against them. But, you know, I wouldn't want to be legally or morally responsible or liable if I forced my employees to have a vaccine which later proved to cause some medical problems or even mental health issues in a particular individual who felt that they'd been coerced into having the vaccine. So I certainly won't want to carry the can for that. And I think, you know, in summary, all I'd say is that I think the whole COVID period has been very, very divisive, much like Brexit immediately before it. So people have become so entrenched in their views and a bit immovable. And I think before making any decisions about what you should or shouldn't impose on your in your business, I'd just urge people to take a step back. You know, think about what sector you're working in. Think about the reality of the risks, the likelihood of infection, the age profile of the business, reputational issues, morale. And I think most importantly, I'd say that you should consult with your employees instead of dictating to them. That's certainly what I do with mine. And I think that we've got a responsibility to do that and bring people along with us.
Okay, thank you very much, Jay. Some very, very interesting arguments, and we have got 3 judges on standby who are going to give me their verdict at the end of the webinar. So please stay to see who actually won that debate. But I think it's going to be helpful now to actually look at some practical case study like scenarios. So Bev, in care homes, do you think it should be mandatory? Do you think it's fine for employers to insist that their staff are vaccinated?
Yes, I do. I think that it is the one area where you, I mean, also bear in mind as well that under the European Convention on Human Rights, the state, the UK government, is able to pass a law if it's in the interests of public health. Although, as Jay says, actually, although the government said that's what they're going to do, they actually haven't done it yet. But I do feel that setting, given the risk to those that they are looking after, that it's going to be very difficult to argue against it being thoroughly justified.
Okay, thank you. Jay?
I think of all the sectors that certainly we're advising, that's probably one that I wouldn't feel as strong about my argument, although I still feel that it shouldn't be something that's enforced. And I was looking at to some information from the charity Revitalise and what the GMB's view on it was, and what they think is it's a disproportionate political move, and it would be a breach of human rights. And apparently 20% of care workers are choosing not to have the vaccine, and they're expecting mass resignation. I think GMB said out of 1,000 carers, more than a third said that they would leave their jobs if vaccines are mandated. So, you know, even on that front, I would say that it's a sector that's already so challenged getting people to work within the sector. Brexit hasn't helped because lots of European people that might have worked in the sector have gone home. And so I think for that reason alone, I would say no, it shouldn't be mandated in their sector.
Okay, well, let's ask the audience then. So launching a poll now. I'm going to give you 30 seconds or so to vote. So those watching, please do vote.
I would also say, David, actually, for the avoidance of doubt, Jay and I are both on the same page in terms of whatever we might think legally, the best way of getting your employees to be vaccinated is absolutely by talking to them and by consultation. So I think that that's absolutely right, and indeed is what ACAS are recommending as well.
Okay, so we had 400 people register for today's webinar, and 180 participants, and I can see that 76% of people have voted. So I'm going to end the poll now, and we can see that it's quite interesting that I thought it would be more in favour, but it's 2/3 are voting yes, and 1/3 is voting no. So that's really interesting.
David, I think you should be able to share the poll results with people. Ah, perfect.
There we go. Thank you, Ali. I said this was my first time doing polls. So thank you for being at hand. So yeah, on hand. So yeah, you can see the results in front of you. So let's move on to the next slide. So shops. Jay, I'm going to ask you to kick off on this one. Do you believe that employers should be able to force staff working in shops to have the COVID vaccine?
Absolutely not. A lot of shop workers are young. They will walk with their feet. I know lots of young people who are not going to be forced to have the vaccine. Again, I think we'll have issues with retail, with a loss of jobs, but also I think it's disproportionate to expect them to. They're not having really close contact with customers. We've already got shops with screens in front, behind the sort of checkout, and other things can be done like wiping down, and they can carry that on. They can have masks if they want to, although I think they'll lose lots of customers if they do, personally. So no, I don't think it's cool.
Okay, thank you, Bev.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, this, isn't it? I was giving a radio interview a couple of weeks ago, and a chap actually called in and said, look, I run a shop, and come the 19th of July, if the general public don't have to wear masks, but they're choosing to, what happens with my staff? Can I force them to wear masks as well? Because if I don't, then judging by the mood of the nation, I don't think anyone's going to come into my shops. So I think that I think that this is something where again it is going to be determined by the kind of shop and the closeness and everything else. I'm sorry, my reception doesn't understand what I'm doing a live webinar means. Yes, so I think it's going to depend on the nature of the shop and also how the public approach after the 19th of July, because after that, they may come in droves not wearing masks and not really being concerned. But if, as we suspect, actually lots of people are going to be coming in wearing masks and still be very, very concerned about it, then I think that in certain circumstances, their employers are going to be able to say, I'm sorry, but we need to be able to give the general public, whatever the word is, assurances that all of our staff have been vaccinated and not going to be passing it on to you. So,
thank you very much. Just getting the hang of this now, polling business. But just while people are voting, Bev, a quick question for you: do you think employers should be allowed to discipline receptionists that put calls through to you during a webinar?
Yes, Absolutely, definitely. Yes, yes. They already tried to put one through actually when we were having our practice session. So yes, they'll definitely be. No, I mean, bless them. They're dealing with lots of people in the building. So
yes. So it depends who's where the communication's fallen down. I think it was probably Bev's fault for not telling the receptionist.
Anybody receptionist out there, send your CV to Bev.
And for anybody who was just saw me smile when Jay was talking, it was because I was having a look at the question and answers with a number of people suggesting that perhaps the knockout blow had been mine in relation to disconnecting Jay from the internet. So it had nothing to do with that. So
I just thought the timing was incredible. But we've got the results in now. We can see that 82% of people feel that you cannot force staff to have the COVID vaccine. So good, excellent. I will now move on to the next slide, if it lets me. Yeah. Come on, backwards.
Workplace affairs.
I think we're on law firms.
Oh yes, there is one before that. You're quite right.
Okay, it's just a little bit slow, the connection. So just wait for it to
nothing to do with me. No. I may have powers, but they're not that strong.
Just using another method now. Here we go. This is working. Law firms. I'm going to ask Bev to start with this one.
Yes, well, I mean, Jay makes a very good point, which is, you know, what are we going to be doing? Asking our clients if they've been vaccinated before they come through the door, because it'd be very difficult to have, to say that all your employees must be vaccinated, but actually we don't ask the same question of clients. So again, I think that this is one that is going to be very fact specific. I think it is going to be harder to insist, and for the avoidance of doubt, we do not insist that our staff are vaccinated. But I think it is going to be harder in these circumstances unless there is pressure from third parties. And you can see a big firm who does work for, I won't name a company, who says, you know, we do £5 million a year with you. Unless you can tell us that all of your staff have been vaccinated, we are going to move to the next magic circle firm. Then I think that that is the area in which pressure from third parties is going to force the issue.
Thank you. And before I go to Jay, I'd just like you to think about the following scenarios. So the scenario is that you have two people who work in the same room. They work in roles where each has to be physically close to the other, and it's difficult to separate them. One person refuses to have the jab. The colleague has vulnerable family members. So just think about that scenario when you're answering this question. So how do you respond to that, Jay?
Okay, well, I mean, I'd like to know what job is requiring people to work so closely together. In a law firm, I mean, what could it be? We work on documents, say, for example, on SharePoint, where I can be working on a document, as can a colleague who might be in another country. You know, I think, first of all, the first question is to think, well, is that really the case? Or is that the scenario presented by the particular law firm partner or director who perhaps hasn't thought about alternatives like better use of technology? So yeah, I can't really see practically, that's quite a narrow one. In most jobs within a law firm, you're not going to have that close contact. And I don't think, you know, Bev mentioned about third-party pressure from clients. It's a possibility, but I honestly don't think that's going to be a big one. I think it's going to be pressure from other employees. So say, for example, an employee who's really quite enjoyed saving the travel money and nursery fees or school, you know, after school care, etc., wants to work from home, says, I'm not going to have the vaccine, thinking, oh, well, this is my chance because the employer will say, well, you can carry on working from home. And I think those kind of issues amongst colleagues is going to be much more of a thing than from clients.
Okay, I've launched the poll. Just over 100 people have already voted. I'm just going to give them another
I think they're all lawyers, yeah.
You know, now got 125.
Interestingly, I actually said to my staff, because I was called for a double, you know, I had both my jobs quite early on, and I actually made a point of saying to my staff who are younger, don't feel you have to have it. If you don't want to have it, you don't have to, you know, because I don't think that anybody should be forced to have it. Actually, I think they're all choosing to have it, but I think it's important that they know that they've got that choice and that we can work around it.
Okay, well, I think you both agreed on that point. I don't think either of you said that you insisted on staff being vaccinated in your firms, and it certainly hasn't come up in my organisation. I think everybody is in favour of being vaccinated, so we haven't had that difficult scenario. So just sharing results, you can see that 86% have voted no. So yeah, very, very interesting. Right. Just see if we can get this working. It's not liking it. Ah, okay, we've got an alternative way of getting it here. Here we go. So, Mr. Hancock got in quite a lot of trouble, didn't he? He has been insisting that we all follow the rules over the last 16 months or so. And he isn't the only person in government, including the Prime Minister, to apparently be allegedly not following the rules. And in his case, he was caught on a camera, which initially was reported as a covert camera, but later was reported as it was an overt camera. So I'm not quite sure if that's the case, how he thought he was going to get away with that one. But I'm not quite sure whether this is appropriate or inappropriate, because on the one hand, he is breaching the rules by seeing someone outside of his family. But then on the other hand, surely there's a human rights angle to this and the right to a private life, etc. So it's a bit of a conflict there. Jay, which side of the fence do you come on? Which side of the fence are you on?
I hold no moral judgment at all. I think workplace affairs happen. I've been practicing for 30 years and I've seen lots of them happen around me, and they still do. So I don't have any issue with him having an affair. You know, that's a matter for him and his wife, and the person he had an affair with, and her husband, who doesn't get much of a mention. But I think that to be telling us not to go and visit our dying relatives, and not to go and do the things that we enjoy doing, not to go and, you know, visit our children who may be struggling, you know, with mental health issues and whatever, and then to go and do this is appalling. So I think it's just the breach of the isolation, and all of that is obviously wrong, but otherwise, to be honest, issue with it.
Okay, thank you very much. Bev?
Yeah, a little smile as well when Jay said that she's seen lots of workplace affairs and has been practicing for many years. So, for the avoidance of doubt, practicing law. But yes, I mean, certainly the expression "not socially distancing" has taken on a whole new level since those pictures were revealed, and I think it's important that businesses actually do have policies in relation to relationships at work, because of course, you know, in those kind of situations where they're perhaps, you know, working closely together, they shouldn't have been obviously that close, but that's not so much of an issue, but it can become an issue where you have more senior people who are having affairs with more junior people and favouring them in some ways. So I know a lot of clients who do have workplace relationship policies, and so that's very important. But equally, you know, I do think that it was very unfair to have that splashed over every tabloid, and for the lady concerned to wake up and fined a whole load of cameramen outside her home. I do think it was equally very unfair of somebody to place on Twitter or wherever it was a suggestion that she had recently had COVID, and this was clearly obvious because she's lost her sense of taste. I wouldn't make any comments at all about Matt Hancock. Say what you like about him. You know, the vaccination programme has been a huge success, whichever side of the fence you happen to sit on in relation to this particular debate. But yeah, and so I think we need to focus on what he has been good at. She probably is as well. Yeah.
But can I just say, it was really strange because in the second lockdown, my team every other call seemed to be about an affair and things had gone wrong and not being able, I don't know if you found that, Bev, but we had so many calls because we've had lots of trends as employment lawyers, haven't we, over this period, you know, furlough, redundancies, this, that, and there was a period definitely of affairs.
Yes, yeah, most definitely. But, you know, but equally, yeah, if they had been employees of ours and we were all supposed to be abiding by the rules and they brought the organisation into disrepute by being caught on camera, then I suspect that both of us would have had something to say about that, just in terms of reputational damage. And that is the really sad thing, that actually having done such a good job of mostly steering the NHS to a good vaccination programme, that it ends in that way. So, you know, reputational risk is really big for any organisation.
Okay, thank you both very much. Now, we have got an unprecedented number of questions come in. It looks like maybe 30, so I'm not going to go through all 30 because that will take an hour. I'm going to extend this by say 10 to 15 minutes so that we do have a good job at some of these questions. Before I do that, I'd like to read out the results because the judges, our judges, have made a decision who's the winner. So our first judge in Abingdon scores this 115 to 110 in favour of Bev. Our second judge also scores it 115 to 110. This judge is in Sheffield and votes for Jay.
Old Sheffield.
So the final judge, based in Loughborough, has scored this as 112, 112. So it is a score draw.
Great.
So let's have a look at the Q&As. So there's lots and lots of them. I'd invite Bev and Jay to open up the Q&A box and let's just have a look. Let's try and pick some out. So yeah, we've got the comment, does Bev win for cutting off her competitor's internet? I have had a client's question regarding wanting or trying too soon become pregnant. Would this be covered by the same argument, being pregnant? So if someone's trying to become pregnant, that's quite a good question. Is that the same thing as being pregnant in having a reason to refuse the vaccine, Bev? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that, and I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, that the guidance has now moved away from if you are pregnant, don't have the vaccine. So you have to think that the same would apply if you are trying to get pregnant. I was talking to somebody the other day who was saying that actually the advice that her pregnant daughters had was that the risk to pregnant women is much higher, and therefore, again, it's a balance of risk. So, you know, but equally, if you are trying to get pregnant or pregnant, it's a very, very personal thing when somebody is, you know, very, very vulnerable and very worried about the health of their child. So I think any employer would have to exercise extreme caution in those circumstances. And I don't think trying to sort of say to somebody, well, you don't have a job unless you have the vaccine is going to be very effective.
There's some terrific questions here, really great questions. How about if we ask our staff if they've had the jab and they refuse to answer and say it is none of our business, what can we do then? And I'm going to ask Jay to answer that one.
Nothing. I don't think you can insist that they tell you whether they've had the vaccine or not. Bev, do you know of any?
No, I think if you're saying to employees, you need to prove that you've got you've been vaccinated. That's very easy to do with the NHS app now, although bear in mind that that doesn't apply in Scotland or possibly Wales. I don't think it's available, but for everybody else, you know, you've got the app on the phone and you just show it, and it shows the date and the batch number. So, but if they're refusing to answer, well, if you have a policy that you properly thought out, that you have, you know, got justification for, and they're refusing to let you know whether they've been vaccinated or not, then you're going to have to say to them, if you don't answer, we're just going to treat it as if you haven't been vaccinated. So, you know, sorry, goodbye. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing there, following a correct procedure and everything else. It's a very serious matter to have to dismiss somebody from their job. But if that is the decision that you have reached, then I think you would have to treat it in that way.
Okay, so a question here for Bev. So let's just imagine, for the sake of humour and arguments, that you're going to be recruiting for a new receptionist, Bev. Are you able to ask at the interview whether or not they've been vaccinated to prevent further transmission?
Well, I think that if I had done the assessment that I talked about, that I weighed the pros and cons and considered that actually the receptionists do need to be vaccinated, then I think that if I've made it clear in the ads that you need to be vaccinated, then I think that in those circumstances, you'd be able to ask for them to show the NHS app on their phone and show that they have been, or get the certificate. And
do you think that these certificates could be forged?
Oh, and most things can be forged these days, but they can be. But most people will have access to a smartphone of some sort, even if they are much older people, but they'll have children and grandchildren who still might be able to sort of download it, because you have to upload all your information and stuff. But otherwise, get a certificate. Yeah, they might be able to forge them, but yeah, they'll just have to cross that bridge in the same way as they cross it with money.
Okay, thank you.
I think just to add to that scenario from an employment law point of view, you have to be careful with recruitment, because although the government or the media is talking about this no jab, no job, actually, you know, you do need to be sure that there's no Equality Act issue, no protected characteristic, which is going to bite you on the bum if you reject somebody just because they've not had a vaccine.
Oh, absolutely. And as I said, you know, that's why you would have been doing your objective justification in terms of that particular business, that particular role. Is there a better way of doing this? So that if somebody does come at you with an argument over discrimination, then you would put up your objective justification argument, and it might not win, might not succeed, or it might. We don't know until they start coming through.
Okay, great. As a compliance company, DG Legal does compliance software in order to help people meet their compliance obligations, and amongst other things, they will have central registers in the software. Now, somebody's asked, can you have a central register of people that have been vaccinated? Can you collect that data? Maybe that's more of a question for a data protection lawyer, but do you have any views on that?
Well, I mean, you know, it would fall into the same category as any medical data. And as you know, under the Data Protection Act, it enjoys really enhanced status. So you'd have to be very careful as to how it was stored, collected, who had access to it. And you'd have to make sure that your privacy statement and everything else that you publish in relation to data protection makes it very clear to employees why you're keeping it, how long you keep it for, and who will actually have access to it. So.
Yeah, I think you can keep that data, and I know that there are HR software. I think the one we use for our clients collects that sort of data, but it's what you do with it that you have to be careful about. You know, it would be a breach of privacy if you shared that.
Mm.
There's a question here saying that the virus is a health threat. Now, if an employee has to go ahead with the vaccine and later dies, let's say of a blood clot, the family of the employee will sue or may sue the employer, as people can alternatively use the NHS daily self-test and wear masks until the trial of the vaccine ends. What would be the legal defence for the employer? Any comments on that, either of you?
Well, I mean, I think that the person that they would be looking to sue in those circumstances would be the maker of the vaccine. I think that if the employer has objectively justified why they want people to be vaccinated, I don't think it's reasonably foreseeable that the employee would die as a result. As I said, it's a very, very tiny proportion of those who have been affected by that, particularly as they're not actually given AstraZeneca to anybody under 40, I think now. So I, whilst they might think about suing the employer, I don't think that they would be successful.
Okay, well, you've got somebody saying, hi, Bev, I'm a great fan of yours, especially from your last webinar. But I'm not going to go through the question just because there's so many questions here. I mean, it's...
Can I just clarify? I've just seen one from Simon saying, Jay sounds like she is not and will not personally have a vaccine. Has she had a vaccine? Well, if I didn't want to tell you whether I have or not, Simon, I wouldn't, but I'm perfectly happy to tell you I have had the vaccine, but had anybody tried to force me to have it and I had not wanted it, then I wouldn't have had it. But I have had it, both of them.
Yeah, there's a good point there also from Lewis saying the suggestion of pork fat in vaccine is the same rumours that gave rise to the Indian Mutiny. If this is asserted, how come no leader of the Muslim or Jewish communities has objected to the vaccine? It's a reasonable point, Jay?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know the truth of it. I was just, as I was doing my research, I came across that some people thought that there was, pork gelatin, and that might be a reason for them choosing not to have it.
Okay, question from Chris. The vaccines are only 90 to 95% effective, so 1 in 10 to 1 in 20 of those vaccinated are still at risk or won't know it. Given the duty of care to all employees and given the fears of those who are vaccinated about working with those who are not, can you comment on the additional steps that the unvaccinated could be required to comply with, e.g. mask wearing, continued social distancing, also the issue of clients, perhaps high-risk elderly clients in private client settings, potentially being put at risk by unvaccinated staff. So that's kind of following up our law firm scenario. Do you have any follow-up comments to that, Bev?
Yes, well, as I understand the science, wearing a mask protects other people against you. So I think that certainly you could put in place a number of things like that, and social distancing. But I mean, it's going to be quite hard, isn't it, as we move forward? And to Jay's point, I mean, we've been through this for 16 months, and we quite like things to get back to normal. So if an entire office is having to socially distance because one person refuses to have a vaccination, then I think that the other employees are going to get quickly quite fed up with it. But it is the second half of the question is a very good one, which is the issue of clients, for instance, high-risk elderly clients, not putting unvaccinated people in front of them because it's 50% increased transmission rate. So I think that pushes us more towards, obviously, my argument that those in law firms should be vaccinated, but they are good practical points that really need to be thought through by law firms, because, and again, it's not a one size fits all. If you just do corporate work, you don't see anybody and you just talk to them on Zoom, that's one thing. But if you do private client and you've got lots of elderly people coming in, that's quite different.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to ask one final question and then wrap things up. A number of the questions are the same questions, so hopefully we've answered the majority, and apologies to those that we didn't get time to answer. But the last question I want to put to both of you, I'll ask Jay first. Question from Katie: can I insist on staff laterally flow testing?
Currently, can you insist? No, I don't think you can insist on lateral flow tests. But I think it would be very hard to justify why you wouldn't treat that employee differently at the moment if they didn't have a lateral flow test, if you can show that it's important for the business, because the employee is going to be coming into close contact with others and you haven't put other measures in place to prevent transmission. I don't think you can actually force anyone to have the lateral flow test.
Bev, any further thoughts?
No, I agree. You can't force them, but I mean, one of the things we've been saying to clients in answer to the should we insist that everybody gets vaccinated question is we've said consider things like lateral flow tests on a regular basis, particularly if they're going to be coming into contact with other people. And if you're, if you don't want to do that, then unfortunately there's no place for you in the business. And we think that that's a reasonable and proportionate alternative to asking that you get vaccinated. And in fact, one care home that we spoke to, who again took the view that they weren't going to force people, that they were going to do it by reasoning with the staff. But what they said to everybody is, you need to come in 20 minutes before your shift starts and do a lateral flow test, sit there, we need to see that result. She said after a week of it, they all said, right, which arm do you want? And they all had their vaccinations. So, but it is an alternative.
Okay, thanks very much. I just want to finish by saying that you will get a copy of the slides. I think this is the first webinar ever that nobody's asked that question. So thanks for that. You will get the slides, as I say. I would just ask one favour from everybody. I always say this, but please do leave a rating and hopefully a review. It's the ratings and the reviews that motivate us to continue providing free training to lawyers and law students. We're getting close to 500. So the person that leaves the 500th review, we will be especially grateful and may get a surprise. So thank you so much for attending the webinar, and huge thanks to Bev and Jay, who slugged it out very graciously, I felt, and had some really tough questions to think on their feet without any preparation. So very good answers, and also very good questions for those that put those questions forward. So thank you once again, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good week. Bye for now.